Hello everyone, thank you so much to the organizers of this event for inviting me and also for asking me to talk about adult learning and education as a tool, but a tool for what? And I personally found this question very challenging, and I will also tell you why. Because, well, a tool, when we think about a tool, of course, we think maybe about, you know, a device that you need for plumbing or for fixing something, for building something. So is adult education really a tool? When we look at what the European Commission and specifically their unit on adult learning says about the role of adult learning, we will find as one of the objectives of adult learning to fix employability issues and unemployment, atypical forms of work, frequent professional transitions, shifting employment between sectors, shifting skills needs, demographic changes, and so on. We hear a lot about the objectives of learning. Then, of course, we also have the sustainable development goals at the international level. Again, an objective for adult learning to achieve sustainability, to ensure that we have a sustainable lifestyle, a sustainable economy, environment, and so on. Another idea that's always coming up in discussions at the EU level is that ALE could be a tool to find a solution to the energy crisis and climate change. And you've probably also heard about other solutions to this specific kind of crisis, but adult learning and education is certainly one of those instruments that are mentioned very often. And then another objective of ALE, to fight populist trends. I'm sorry if I always say ALE. Also for the interpreters, I'm talking about adult learning and education, just in case there are any misinterpretations. So yeah, to fight populist trends, is that an objective of adult learning? Or to build personal resilience, to cope with the unpredictability of the world or the so-called megatrends that we see around us, that include also digitalization and climate change, the changing world of work, and so on. And typically then what we hear at the European level is that we need a quick fix for all of these issues. And where could this quick fix come from? Adult learning and education to the rescue. And this creates quite a challenge for us. And we can see that in the policy context at the European level, we have quite a lot of initiatives and strategies that all include adult learning. That some of them really focus on adult learning specifically, and some others include adult learning. For instance, the European Pillar of Social Rights, which has as its first principle the right to lifelong learning and education. We also have the key competences for lifelong learning at the EU level, the new skills agenda for Europe and upskilling pathways. You might have heard about that because you probably are involved in the implementation process at the national levels. And since 2020, we also have the European education area with the EU Pact for Skills and the new European Agenda for Adult Learning, which was adopted last year at the end of 21. And then we have, of course, also a couple of other initiatives and strategies where adult learning plays an important role. For instance, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which was created already during the pandemic to find solutions to rebuild the economy and create more social cohesion to overcome the challenges of the pandemic. And the European Green Deal also plays a key role in finding a solution for climate change achieve sustainable green transition. And then we also have a couple of frameworks at the European level that all include different kinds of learning, but including also adult learning, and that focus on specific competences or skills. For instance, the LifeComp framework on life competences or life skills, the FinComp framework on financial competences, the GreenComp framework on green competences, and the DigComp framework on digital competences. And all of those have been published over the last 2-3 years. So there's quite a lot on that going on at the European level. And then if we look more at the international level, which is probably also interesting for you, is we have the Confrontier process of the UNESCO with the Marrakesh Framework for Action, which was adopted this year in June, which includes quite a lot of areas where adult learning should play a key role, and also how adult learning should be supported at the national level through governance, finance, and so on. Of course, on the top of all of that are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and especially the goal 4 on education, and then the specific targets on access to vocational education and training, to employability, to the elimination of discrimination in education, universal literacy and numeracy, which is specifically interesting for the area of basic education, and sustainability and global citizenship education. And this is to illustrate the objectives of the European Union on participation in adult learning, which is, according to the European institutions, and of course also from our perspective, too low. We need to increase the participation of adult learners adults in adult learning. And we're currently, if we use the adult education survey, at 38% participation of adults within 12 months in adult learning, and we want to achieve 50% by 25, and I think until 2030 it should even be 60%. So this is quite ambitious, but then we always have to ask the question, what for? And I think there are, okay, sorry for that weird word break here in the second column, I didn't see that before. I think there are two different perspectives of adult learning that we are currently seeing at the European and international level. And the one is a very instrumental view of adult learning, and the other one really tries to focus on the emancipatory and transformative spirit or approach to adult learning. And if we look back to the European policies and strategies that I just introduced a tiny bit, is that very often they are very much outcome focused. So they look at how can adult learning contribute to sustainability? How can it decrease unemployment? How can it, You can just add to the list. And it's a very instrumental view of adult learning, I'd say. And it generally also starts from a very individual perspective, and it's focused on self-development, how people can change themselves to adapt to a certain system, to improve the system. And there is one term that's been coming up in the last 2 years quite a bit, and that's the neoliberal turn. So not the neoliberal, but the neoliberal turn. And that talks a lot about this change in the perspective on adult learning, which focuses very much on what happens in terms of psychological developments, what happens within adults when they learn, and moving the perspective away from how do adults learn and where is learning happening, and considering also the wider environment. And this also goes hand in hand with, I'd say, an increasing commercialization of adult learning. And we can also see that in one of the policies that I hadn't included actually in the overview before, and that's the individual learning accounts, where we see that, that there is this idea to create markets for adult learning, and this commercialization, commodification of adult learning in a certain sense. And of course, there are always benefits to these kinds of policies, but we also have to look at what they might do to adult learning systems. And on the other hand, there is this more transformative perspective of adult learning that's more action-focused, that also looks at the wider benefits of adult learning, the intrinsic value of learning, which can also sometimes be problematic as an approach. But it takes the community and the society level into account, which is really quite a difference to the more instrumental view of adult learning. And generally, it also tries to introduce democratic methods and participatory methods. Well, when I prepared for this presentation, I wondered about so what's adult learning actually really doing? I mean, why should we learn as adults? And then I found this very nice quote of Adorno, which is already like, I mean, this is more than 60 years ago, and it's from actually 3 different texts, I think, where he reflects on education after Auschwitz, and the role of learning. And where he basically says that if we want a democracy, if we want to have a society that's participatory, where people can really join and shape decisions and so on, it needs mature citizens or people, and it needs people who are willing to put energy into making that change. And he very much also talks about education for contradiction and resistance. And for me, this is probably, for me personally, but then I think a lot of people at EAA would join that perspective. It's very much about looking at our identity. We actually heard that in the previous presentation. Look at our role in society, and what we want to do to change that. And perhaps also think about what we want to change in general. And what is needed for that is transformative learning that empowers people to start and share change in their communities, in society at large, and at all levels, at the economic, social, and environmental levels. It also requires a better understanding of adult learning in a more holistic way. So why is it that we are learning? Where is it that we are learning? And who is it impacting? And I think there we can draw maybe a lot of inspiration also from Paulo Freire when he talks about education for critical consciousness. And maybe I should also tell you a bit about my background. I actually studied development studies before I also studied to become an adult educator. And when from those studies of development studies, I got a lot of ideas on how to be change-oriented, how to be critical, have that critical consciousness. And when I then saw the other perspective from pedagogics, andragogics, and so on, this is what I missed a bit. And I found it very much back in adult learning, where all of these approaches are already there and have implemented so well in so many contexts. And and there's still so much to learn for us, also in terms of citizenship education, and becoming more critical persons, and make the change. And this year, ERLi is dedicating its annual theme to transformative learning and values. So you can see that actually this is a perspective that we really also promote at the European level. And when we talk to policymakers, to researchers, to decision makers at various levels. And going back a few years, actually, we worked also on life skills, and we still draw a lot of inspiration from that work, because this is also where we looked at the wider benefits of adult learning and what do learners need to be able not only to develop themselves, but also how to develop their communities, society, and so on. And actually, here is a European policy that is also taking on that perspective very much. It's the new European Agenda for Adult Learning that I mentioned before. And I'm glad to say that we had a lot of impact on that policy, because well, it still also includes, of course, all the objectives of adult learning, like addressing challenges such as climate change, demography, technology, and so on. But it's really talking more about addressing them and providing the necessary conditions for people to be agents of change through the choices they make. And then, of course, the next step will be to look at how a choice is impacted and how can people shape these choices that they have. And how can we get there? Yeah, we need that focus on action, co-creation, participation. I think this is already very much also in the building project, this idea of doing something together, empowering people to address issues, propose change, and develop new solutions, and connect people and communities. And this is one of the points that I'd also really like to emphasize, that if we have strong partnerships at all levels, including learners, providers, educators, civil society, social services as well, policymakers, researchers, then we can really work or create a transformative kind of adult learning. And of course, we also need policy coherence at all levels. If I look at the more practical level, and we need structural funding for adult learning that's not purely employment or skills related, and including also benchmarks for the financing of adult learning. But I think it's that funding for adult learning that's not for a certain purpose or objective of adult learning that's really key in order to also empower actually adult learning providers and organizations to provide that kind of transformative learning. Okay, and that's actually my presentation. If you have any questions, then please go ahead now, or otherwise later. You can find my email address here on the slide. And yeah.
Thank you, Raffaela.
You.